Hello and welcome back to the Weighted Native Chronicles. Right now the conversation around Alberta separatism is loud, emotional, and increasingly hostile, especially on social media. Opponents of separatism often dismiss the idea outright by branding its supporters as traitors and by telling them, if you don't like Canada, you should just leave. But that argument cuts both ways. One could just as easily turn it around and say, maybe it's the opponents of Alberta separatism who could consider leaving, because in the end, the outcome will hinge on a democratic process, not on insults traded online. And that's part of the problem. As rhetoric heats up, both sides talk past one another, motives are assumed, and complex questions are reduced to slogans. So in this video, the goal is not to inflame that dynamic further. Instead, the aim is to slow things down and introduce some historical context, to look at past changes to Canada's power structures, and ask whether there are similarities or precedents that can help guide our thinking today. Because before we decide who is loyal and who is not, it's worth understanding how Canada itself came to be what it is. People say Alberta separatism is traitorous, but they forget something. Canada itself was once told that separating from Britain was reckless, dangerous, impossible, and even traitorous. Those warnings were wrong then, so the question we'll look at today isn't should Alberta separate, it's why, even if history isn't exactly repeating, it often sort of rhymes. So before we go any further, let's slow down this matter just a bit and ground the conversation in some Canadian history. Not to argue for any outcome and not to relitigate old battles, but to understand what actually happened so we can see where today's controversy truly parallels the past and where it clearly does not. And most importantly, to answer a question that keeps getting asked. Are Alberta separatists traitors? Before 1867, there was no country called Canada. What existed were British colonies, Upper Canada, Lower Canada, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and others, all under British sovereignty. By the mid-1800s, many of these colonies had responsible government. They elected assemblies and managed most local affairs, but real authority still sat an ocean away. Britain controlled foreign policy, constitutional authority, and ultimately had the final word. Some people accepted that, others openly questioned it. When Confederation happened in 1867, it did not make Canada independent. The British North America Act was a British law passed by the British Parliament. Canada became a self-governing dominion, but Britain retained ultimate authority. And even then, this step was controversial. People warned it would weaken loyalty, divide the population, and destabilize the country. These were not fringe opinions. They were mainstream concerns. Here's a key point. No serious historian today calls early Canadian autonomy advocates traitors to Britain. They're called nation builders now. Canada's independence unfolded gradually. In 1931, the Statute of Westminster gave Canada control over its own laws and foreign policy. Even then, critics accused supporters of weakening imperial unity. And in 1982, with the Constitution Act, Canada finally gained full constitutional independence. Looking back, these steps are seen as lawful, legitimate, and democratic. Now bring this back to Alberta. Alberta is not a colony, it is a province within a federation. That matters, especially legally. But the question of loyalty is where the historical comparison becomes relevant. So are Alberta separatists traitors? No, not by law, not by history, and not by democratic principle. Advocating constitutional change, even advocating separation, is not treason in a democracy. It's political dissent. Economic issues are often the most visible part of Alberta's frustration: energy policy, fiscal transfers, regulatory control. But economics alone doesn't explain the intensity of the debate. For many Albertans, the deeper frustration is cultural, political, and democratic, a sense that the country itself is being reshaped in ways they neither voted for nor can meaningfully influence. This tension didn't appear overnight. It accelerated during the years of Pierre Trudeau and intensified further under Justin Trudeau. Across both eras, many Albertans feel they have watched a centralized vision of Canada override regional values in the name of progress. One example often cited is the expansion of official multiculturalism, not as inclusion, but as a framework that discourages any shared national identity at all. To many Albertans, Canada no longer feels like a common project, but instead a collection of groups managed from Ottawa according to ideological priorities. Immigration policy is another flashpoint. It's not opposition to immigration itself, but concern over unprecedented intake levels, weak integration expectations, and the absence of meaningful public consent. To critics, this feels less like nation building and more like social engineering. Then there's the rapid adoption of DEI and other woke frameworks across federal institutions. Many Albertans see these policies as replacing merit and equal treatment with identity-based outcomes, and doing so by mandate, not persuasion. Another growing concern is what many Albertans perceive as a gradual but increasingly aggressive effort by the federal government to disarm Canadian citizens. To critics, this is not simply a debate about public safety. It is seen as a steady erosion of lawful firearms ownership, often through reclassification, prohibition, and mandatory confiscation without criminal wrongdoing. For many Albertans, this raises not only civil liberties concerns, but serious property rights concerns as well. Firearms legally purchased, registered, stored, and owned for decades are increasingly treated as conditional privileges, subject to removal by policy change rather than due process. To those who hold this view, the issue is not the tools themselves, but the precedent being set. If lawfully owned property can be rendered illegal by decree, with compensation uncertain or delayed, it reinforces the fear that ownership rights, not just gun ownership, are becoming increasingly fragile. That sense of imposition reached a breaking point during the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act against lawful protest. For many Albertans, watching emergency powers used internally and later ruled unjustified by a federal court shattered trust in Ottawa's restraint and respect for civil liberties. Add to this aggressive climate policies that disproportionately impact Alberta's economy and what many see as reflexive alignment with international frameworks like UNDRIP, often without clear domestic limits or democratic accountability. Layered on top of all of this is a growing sense of democratic futility, election after election. Many Albertans watch the federal outcome effectively decided by Ontario and Quebec before Alberta's votes are even counted. The result is a widespread belief, right or wrong, that Alberta can vote overwhelmingly one way, cycle after cycle, and see a federal government it's strongly opposed take power regardless. When people believe their votes no longer matter, pressure doesn't disappear. It simply moves elsewhere. And that feeling is not new in Canadian history. It closely mirrors how many Canadians once felt under British rule, when decisions that mattered most were made far away by politicians unaffected by the consequences. Before we wrap up, I want to sincerely thank those of you who've stayed to the end of this discussion. That tells me you're willing to slow down, look past slogans, and seriously consider the many factors that shape the question of Alberta separatism in a fair and balanced way. This isn't a simple issue, and reasonable people can disagree strongly. without questioning one another's motives or loyalty. So I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, whether you're supportive of separatism, opposed to it, or still working your way through where you stand. And I want to say something directly to those of you who lean towards separatism. Do not allow yourselves to be intimidated or silenced by being called traitors. Questioning the structure of government, opposing policies you believe are unjust, and advocating for greater autonomy are not acts of disloyalty. They are core democratic rights. You are citizens, and you have every right to have your voice in shaping your future and the future of your children. Canadian history is filled with examples of people who were once dismissed or condemned for opposing unfair restrictions on liberty and who were later proven right. They're remembered not as traitors, but as principled and courageous. That tradition belongs to you as well. So don't let anyone talk you down, shame you into silence, or convince you that asking hard questions makes you less Canadian. If you find value in long-form, careful discussions like this, you can support the channel by subscribing, clicking like, leaving a comment, and using the super thanks button below, or buy me a coffee through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. From the Weighted Native Chronicles, thank you for watching. Thank you for thinking deeply. Catch you next time. Did you like this video? If you did, I think you're going to like this one right over here. So check it out. And I appreciate your subscribing if you haven't done so already. Remember to do that while you're watching this next video. Click like, it all helps us out for this channel. Catch you next time.